Good morning, Colorado. You are listening to the Daily Sun Up. It's a conversation with the Colorado Sun. I'm team editor David Krause. Before we jump into today's conversation, here is a quick message from our sponsor.
Immerse yourself in the stars we do not see. Australian Indigenous art. The largest display of Australian Indigenous art ever presented in North America. Now on view at the Denver Art Museum. See 130 works by 142 artists drawn exclusively from the National Gallery of Victoria's world-leading collection. On view now through July 26th. Get tickets at denverartmuseum.org. Energy Outreach Colorado is a statewide nonprofit helping income-qualified Coloradans pay their energy bills. They support hardworking families facing tough choices between paying utilities and buying essentials like food. Learn how Energy Outreach Colorado is creating affordable energy solutions for Coloradans at energyoutreach.org. If your air conditioner never seems to stop running, old windows could be the reason. Upgrade now during Window Nation's Buy 4, Get 4 free sale. Replace your windows and get half free. Plus, no money down and no interest for 2 years. Don't wait. Save big today. Visit windownation.com. Proud partner of Wounded Warrior Project.
Now, back to the show. I am here with Sun business reporter Tamara Chuang, and we are giving you a special episode of the David and Tamara show, as it were, taking over a Thursday spot to talk about the millions of dollars, both public and private, being poured into downtown Denver to help revive the energy that was pretty much drained when the pandemic hit, and just a partial return of office workers in the years after that. Welcome to a Thursday episode.
Yeah, it's feels like a Tuesday episode.
Feels like a Tuesday, but it's a bonus Thursday. Tamara, we just wrapped up a really great deep dive into what's going on in downtown Denver, looking at office space, Civic Center Park, and the Pavilions along 16th Street. Tamara, let's give our listeners a bit of an idea of how the downtown story and the scrutiny of it started, and how this story kind of bloomed into a bigger look at the struggle of downtown.
Sure. So from my perspective, this story started actually probably last fall or so. The thing is, a lot of us here at the Sun, we used to work at the Denver Post, which has a really nice building downtown. So a lot of us really knew the area or know that downtown strip. And we, at the Sun, we obviously covered a lot of the pandemic issues. I know Jennifer Brown covered a lot of the social issues and, encampments and stuff like that. I covered sort of that office space, what happened to the whole market. It just completely collapsed. Office workers went home during the pandemic. And there was a lot of, it was hard. It was hard to walk around and see so much emptiness or, so much filth, as one of our stories does say. But watching the change and how much the city of Denver has been investing in it, we've been watching sort of from afar, thinking, this is a Denver story. Is it a Colorado story? And at some point we're like, well, people do need to know what's going on in downtown Denver, even if they live in Durango or, Western Slope or, Yuma and stuff. So that's how we plowed into this, kind of splitting up duties. I took sort of that economy, office, redevelopment market. Jen took the Civic Center Park and sort of the social issues. And we also had a third story from one of our freelancers who really has been following what's been happening with the Pavilions, which is that huge outdoor mall that opened back in like the late 1990s in downtown. But as I mentioned, I covered some of the office vacancies in downtown. It went from like 20% to 25 to 30%. And I remember doing a story about office space probably back in even like 22 or 2023. So two 2 or 3 years after the pandemic had actually started, these offices were still pretty vacant. And one real estate broker had mentioned, yes, but what about the zombie buildings? And that kind of was that term for, these large office buildings that were mostly leased, with actual tenants who had signed long-term leases, but the tenants had left. So there was actually no one in the building. They're having a hard time subleasing or just finding new tenants. So, in the scheme of things, what happened with downtown, if you lived there, especially if you lived in the downtown area, the city did a ballot measure, I think it was 23 or 24, which essentially took advantage of an old economic development tool called a tax increment financing tool, that helped redevelop the whole Union Station downtown. And they said, let's do this for upper downtown. So this whole area between like Civic Center Park, well past the mall, and voters approved it. They got $570 million to use to sort of borrow against future taxpayer money, to sort of spur that development. And in the past year, so in less than a year, they've approved more than 16 projects. A lot, like 3 or 4 of them are to take, these unwanted or underused office buildings and turn them into apartments and housing. Money was awarded to small business merchants who will bring in, that unique flavor to that 16th Street area. And money was for public safety and for city facilities like the McNichols building, which is in the Civic Center Park, but also for the Civic Center Park itself. And of course, the city bought the Pavilions Mall, which kind of seems like a shocker, but there's a story behind that. And so that's kind of what we covered with this story.
Tamara, you started the series on Sunday with a really thoughtful and well-rounded look at how the city of Denver, as well as an entity known as the Downtown Denver Authority, are trying to revamp downtown, like you mentioned, through some of these loans. Can you start with how the DDA and the city are separate, but yet working toward the same goal?
Yes, I should have clarified this. I had mentioned the TIF. So that was that tax increment financing tool that the city used back in, the early 2000s to redevelop Union Station. So that's what they were using again. But technically, they gave that authority to something called the Downtown Development Authority. So they actually have sort of that financial wherewithal to approve these loans and make those decisions on their own. They don't have to necessarily go through the city. I think they do seek the city's blessing on some of these things. But the DDA is actually the one borrowing the money and then awarding it to these developers. And then the developers have to pay back the DDA, and then the DDA has to pay back the city with interest. So that's why, it's considered, I called it a quasi-government entity because it does seem to work side by side with the city, but it has the authority to make decisions fast, and that's what they're trying to do. I did talk to Bill Mosher, he's a commercial real estate guy who was actually part of the original team that did the Union Station makeover. So he is advising the current DDA on what projects to invest in and how to move quickly and get that hundreds of millions of dollars, get it working fast. So we're just starting, so we'll see what happens, but it is really interesting. DDA has so far approved about $225 million worth of projects, but most of them have actually not started, but some of them have, and we do get into that in the story.
Tamara, let's get into those private dollars that are going into these changes as well. One of the more interesting is the push to buy these office towers and buildings for really crazy low prices. Will you kind of run through some of those deals and the plans behind them, Tamara?
Yeah. So what's happening here is the DDA is actually not buying the buildings or not. They are just offering these very low interest loans, which are about 3%. So, if you know what your credit card interest is, it's way higher than that. And even if you get a commercial loan, it's going to be higher than that. But I started this story because I saw a lot of these downtown office towers that were pretty empty. And the problem with that is, even if owners could hold on to the buildings, if they were recent buyers of these buildings, it's very costly to pay off the loans because, those loans didn't get a break during the pandemic. They still had to pay full rate, unless they could negotiate a new rate. Or what happened for some of these buildings is they went into foreclosure. So then that's when, you know, developers like I interviewed one group from the Luzzatto company. The president is Asher Luzzatto. And what they do is they do try to find these distressed buildings. He ended up paying, or his company paid $3.2 million for two skyscrapers down by California and 17th Street. And they're going to turn it's like 1 million square feet of office space. And it was mostly, I think he had told me it was like 70% empty at the time when I talked to him, which was like February or March. So it's been a while I've been working on this project. But anyway, he paid 3.2 million, which sounds like a steal. I mean, that could be like a house in Cherry Creek. But this building originally sold in 2008 for 112 million. So my calculations was that he was paying 3 cents on the dollar. The thing is, it's not like he got this really great deal. I mean, he still has to invest a lot of money into it. His expectation is that the project will cost $315 million to do the conversion. They did get a loan from the DDA to help with that. It's, I believe, around 63 million. But the thing is, the DDA's part of the project is around 20% of what developers like the Luzzatto company must raise in order to turn their dream into reality, right? And in the end, if it does work, the downtown has developers who are committed to restoring certain buildings and bringing in a new feature like housing for folks who want to live down there. And the idea is that the TIF will be paid back and then some. And then not only will the loans be paid off, but the downtown will be more vibrant because you're going to have more people living there, more activities, stuff to do. So there's, about 100 projects have been proposed to the DDA, and most of them actually were rejected because they weren't within this certain boundary of upper downtown. But some, they just weren't eligible. So right now, I mentioned about 16 projects have been approved, and another 10 are being considered. So I guess there's still room out there. They're only at DDA's only granted $225 million so far, so there could be more announcements down the road.
Tamara, it's interesting as they develop these into more residential buildings than office towers. It kind of correlates to the story that Jen Brown did, a really great look at how the city is spending millions of dollars to make over both the grounds of Civic Center Park as well as the image of the park, which really went downhill during the pandemic. Tamara, walk through how much money Denver is investing and what the plans and goals are with Civic Center Park, which is really a mainstay of the downtown area by the state capitol.
Sure. So if you've been to Civic Center Park, there's actually a big building out there called the McNichols building. And I think for most, right before the pandemic, it was a place for events and stuff like that. But apparently they just couldn't get events to come back to that area. I mean, and the whole area sort of needed this refresh. So part of the DDA, well, DDA did provide some funding to renovate this area, but the city and other organizations are also participating. I think the local, like the Friends group of the park, they are going to be providing maybe like $10 million or something like that for naming. The city may be putting in some money as well, but the idea is cleaning it up and then giving people something to do, something more to do there. So there's actually, I know they had been trying to get a restaurant to locate in the first floor, the McNichols building. So, we're just talking about this where right in the park, there really isn't anywhere to go buy food. even like in any of the nearby buildings. I mean, you have to go back to 16th Street, around these buildings or behind them or whatever to find the eateries. So there's actually the hope is to put a restaurant right there, but with, like an outdoor patio. And then also in the building, they would have like a museum, some other art galleries and stuff like that. So it'd be more of a public space that anyone can go in and see and use. But outside, they want to do like more areas, more like outdoor living rooms where people will hang out. I mean, I think that was kind of what it was like before, but it's sitting on the grass before. Now I think they want to do more seating and canopies so there's shade. There's just a lot of ideas and well, actually they're already in motion, so hopefully we'll see something faster. I mean, I'm sure this will be faster than what might be happening on 16th Street with the conversions I had just mentioned.
A big driver to the 16th Street is the Pavilions, like you mentioned earlier. It covers a couple of blocks, and it really served as a hub, really, for a lot of downtown workers and visitors alike. Talk about the history of the Pavilions, Tamara, and the idea behind it now. There have been a lot of big name retailers and restaurants to come and go from that space.
Yeah, I remember well before the pandemic, and even when I was at the Denver Post as a reporter, I was writing about, well, I covered technology back then, but I think I had to sub in one day and write a story about Uniqlo moving in. That was the Japanese based retailer, very casual wear, very popular. I'm kind of sad that they left during the pandemic. But in my story, I'd mentioned that Uniqlo had picked Denver as to be like the only location in the whole middle of America. I think there was no Uniqlos between, the California and New York and stuff like that. So Denver, especially the pavilions, was like a really strategic location for a lot of these national and international retailers. But of course, when the pandemic happened, it was very depressing. A lot of stores shut down. Well, some of them were, well, a lot of chain stores too, like Hard Rock Cafe closed. I named a few others. I'm trying to remember what they were. But the point is, a lot of that didn't come back. And it's been challenging to try to recruit new tenants. If you've walked around there recently, it's still kind of empty, but there is activity. And I think if you do walk around and are expecting it to be completely vacant, it is not completely vacant. And again, we were talking to Bill Mosher, who is the real estate guy who's working with the DDA. And he had this quote. Let me find it. He was saying, "Oh yes, what's interesting about the pavilions is that it is 38% vacant." He had told us, and then he sort of twisted, reversed that and saying it's actually 62% occupied, and they've got a lot of long-term tenants, and that's true. I mean, H&M is still there. There's several others, and they've added things like temporary art museum to entertainment pop-ups. And I think I attended a recent DDA board meeting, and they were just talking about how the Maggiano's, the restaurant there, had mentioned to them that they were starting to see a pickup in traffic because of the art exhibits. I mean, people were actually going back. So it's still a big work in progress. And actually, I should mention one other thing, that the DDA, the city bought the pavilions. Well, actually, the DDA bought it. So it's a they bought it, but hadn't intended to. They had actually been looking at the two parking lots behind the mall, and because those were revenue generators. I mean, you could charge parking and stuff like that. But they felt like if someone redevelops the mall, or if we redevelop the mall, but someone buys the two parking lots, then something could happen to those pieces of property that doesn't like mesh with the vision of what they want downtown Denver to be. So that's why they ended up buying everything. They spent $37 million for the mall, $22.5 million for parking, and the idea is to clean it up and keep it going, and maybe at some point work with new developers to to fashion them all in the way that benefits, the city of Denver and downtown again. So there's a lot happening. This was really just a starting story to let people know here's where we are at so far.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Tamara. I love the way that the project came together off of just a simple idea a few months ago, and the way that you all have been able to really get into numbers and show people what's going on down there. Really interesting, the behind the scenes situations and conversations that you all were really able to bring out to light. Appreciate the time today, Tamara. And for our listeners, if you haven't read these stories, we'll put them in our show notes. But as well, you can always find Tamara's business news coverage from around Colorado on our homepage and on our free Colorado Sun app. Tamara, thanks for having a Thursday session with me, and I will catch up with you next Tuesday.
Sounds good. And thanks, as usual, to everyone who's listening.
Thanks for listening. And finally, here are a few stories that you should know about today.
Denver Water is raising its fees by roughly 30% to add new homes and businesses to its system. The agency says the rate hike is needed to cover the cost of expanded reservoirs, water supplies, and pipelines. The utility, which serves 1.5 million people in Metro Denver, hasn't raised those rates since 2013. Wildlife advocates are condemning the killing of a male wolf born into the Copper Creek Pack after Colorado Parks and Wildlife officials fatally shot it last week. Wildlife officials said the wolf was responsible for 10 fatal livestock attacks involving 22 sheep, the latest occurring June 10th and 11th. Local governments in Colorado are moving quickly to put moratoriums on new data center development in reaction to public backlash against rising electricity prices, heavy pollution, and lucrative tax breaks. We look at some key questions and answers about the data center debate in Colorado and surrounding states.
To read these stories and much more, visit our website, coloradosun.com. As an award-winning nonprofit news outlet, we take our mission of credible, independent journalism seriously, and you can check out our trust indicators at coloradosun.com/ethics. Our music is by the Denver-based Matt Skellinger Group. A link to their music is in our show notes, and a special thanks to Swallow Hill Music. I'm David Krause. See you next time.